Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening. We are coming back on the air because former President Donald Trump is now surrendering in Fulton County, Georgia. Let's show you the images just into ABC News moments ago. The motorcade pulling up to that jail in Fulton County. As you know, the former president faces felony charges in connection to alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election in the state of Georgia. This is the fourth criminal indictment this year, the motorcade arriving just moments ago. Of course, in this community here, Fulton County, this is the most high-profile criminal defendant to ever be processed at this particular jail. Donald Trump, moments from being booked. We're expecting that fingerprints will be taken. There have been questions about a mugshot, the sheriff making it very clear there that Donald Trump would be treated like any other defendant in Fulton County, indicating that there could very well be a mugshot here. He will be processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and weighed once inside this jail. Now, we know this journey this evening, Trump traveling from Bedminster, New Jersey to Atlanta to Fulton County, where he has arrived. Many of Trump's 18 alleged co-conspirators have already been booked. Former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows surrendering just today. Trump's former attorneys, Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, Sidney Powell, have also been booked. These are images of course, the former president coming down the plane, the stairs there a short time ago upon landing in Atlanta. And here you have the alleged co-conspirators, those who have been booked. The top left of your screen there, Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff, who has been working with his legal team to try to get his particular part of this case moved to federal court. As they await that decision from a judge, he was told he had to show up to surrender in Fulton County no matter what. They were all given the deadline Friday to show up, to be booked, arrested, and so he showed up today. Just a few remain of those 18 alleged co-conspirators. Now, Donald Trump remains the frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination. Trump's processing here as we're watching live here. Images from WSB, our station in Atlanta. The processing of the former president comes 24 hours after the first Republican primary debate, which Donald Trump, of course, did not attend. Some of the news, though, from that debate involving Donald Trump himself, and that was not a surprise. Nearly all of the candidates on that stage last night said, regardless, even if Donald Trump is convicted in any of these cases, that they would still support him if he is the Republican nominee. Let's get right to ABC senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky. He's live outside the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. Aaron, we were told that this could move very quickly.
He's been inside about 10 minutes so far, David, after his motorcade drove right past us and through the gates into this booking facility. And the former president's vehicles are already lining up for his exit. So it is only expected to take mere minutes. For many criminal defendants, this booking process can take hours in a rather unpleasant place. This is the fourth time former President Trump has surrendered to face criminal charges, but the first time he's done so at a jail, and a controversial one at that, known for overcrowding, for the way they treat inmates, for the recent death of an inmate whose body was found covered in bugs. But the former president is not going near any of that necessarily, only there to be fingerprinted, to have his weight and his height recorded, and perhaps even to take his first mugshot. David, one was not required in the other three jurisdictions where he had surrendered.
The sheriff, though, there in Fulton County, Aaron, had indicated publicly that Donald Trump would be treated no differently than other defendants. And as we look at these live pictures from WSB, of course, the ABC affiliate there in Atlanta, covering this right along with our team, Aaron, that was what was expected to play out here, even though more quickly than perhaps other defendants, that the former president would be treated in a similar way.
And I think that reflects the seriousness of the charges, racketeering and a dozen other counts that the former president faces, because the depth of the crimes in the eyes of the district attorney go beyond mere political speech or mere advocacy for a position about what you think happened for the election. The former president is charged with leading a criminal organization that worked to overturn the results against the will of the people of the 2020 Georgia vote. And the former president at the top of this criminal organization, as alleged, that also includes some of his lawyers, some other loyalists who took steps that included phone calls and a pressure campaign, but also included simply falsehoods about fraud, about ballots being fraudulent, about ballots being counted in Germany or Spain, or election machines being linked to Venezuela and the dead leader Hugo Chavez. All of that unfolded over an incredible 9-week period that now constitutes the breadth of this staggering indictment.
We know, Aaron, that the deadline was tomorrow for the former president to show up there in Fulton County. An extraordinary scene playing out here this evening, about 7:45 here in the East. The former president choosing Thursday, the day before the deadline, to show up, to be arraigned, to be booked. But Aaron, there has been a steady stream, if you will, of alleged co-conspirators, names that the American people know after years of the Trump administration. Mark Meadows showed up today. Earlier this week, Rudy Giuliani, the former president's longtime friend and personal attorney, showing up to be arrested and booked. Sidney Powell, another attorney who, as you alluded to moments ago, was part of this group accused of pushing falsehoods, conspiracies, and there they are. It's quite something when you see it up on the screen, the number of mugshots from these alleged co-conspirators that already have been made public by Fulton County authorities, Aaron.
And when you look at those mugshots, you understand the different groups of people that prosecutors allege were working to try and overturn the results of the election. You had the lawyers who were pushing falsehoods, according to prosecutors, to both the public, but also behind the scenes to Georgia lawmakers. Then you had the so-called fake electors who were willing to cast ballots for the candidate that lost the state. And then there were others involved in this odd push to have election machine data looked at, and some of it allegedly stolen at the behest of some Republican officials who are also now part of this indictment, along with the former president.
And we should make clear here, Aaron, that the allegation in this indictment is that they broke into these voting machines after the election in the alleged effort to look for any kind of evidence of fraud they could find to bolster their case.
And there was no legitimate fraud that was ever found. And one of the people who's charged was the county Republican commissioner in rural Coffee County, who sort of gave permission for these people to come in and have a look, inappropriately so. And the indictment says that the election data was ultimately stolen, people's personal information and the like. And so it was a serious breach that comprises just part of this indictment. There are 161 separate acts that have been alleged that make up the conspiracy, the racketeering conspiracy, and former President Trump is alleged to have been the ringleader of all of this.
Stick with us here, Aaron. Now, about 14 minutes before 8 o'clock, and as Aaron reported moments ago, the former president has been inside the Fulton County Jail for a little more than 10 minutes now. Those were live pictures from WSB, and as you know, the live nature of this means they come in and out. The president inside that county jail where he is being processed. We were told that it might go more quickly than the typical defendant, but that everything else about the processing of the former president would be quite similar to other defendants across the spectrum who are brought to that county jail. I'm joined by former prosecutor Chris Timmons, very familiar, obviously, not only with the law, but the way things work in Georgia, former prosecutor there in Georgia, and is very obviously read in on what Fani Willis is trying to do here, the prosecutor in this case, the sweeping nature of this case. And Chris, there were so many questions, and among the significant ones that stood out early on was the question to DA Willis when she was asked, do you intend to try all of these defendants together? Her answer was very simple in that press conference. You were on the air with us, I believe. She said, do I plan to try them together? Yes. But that appears to be increasingly tested here in the almost 2 weeks since that news conference.
Yeah, David, I think that it's definitely up in the air at this point. You've got a judge that's going to want to try everyone together because this is going to be a long trial, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. And so if everybody gets an individual trial, we're talking 19 to 36 years. That's not happening. So on the side of what we refer to as judicial economy is try everyone together. On the opposite side of that is what we refer to as ineffective assistance of counsel. And that is that if you force someone to go to trial when their lawyer is not ready to go to trial, it's possible that the case is going to get overturned when it gets on appeal. And so if you're a judge, the last thing in the world you want to do is be overturned on any ground, let alone ineffective assistance of counsel in a case that is the trial of the century, if not the trial of the millennium.
Thank you very much, Chris Timmons. I'm just hearing in my ear here that the jail has made it official. You're looking on your screen there. If you do a jail search, the defendant's names come up, and there you see the defendant's name, Donald J. Trump. He has been booked and processed there in Fulton County, Georgia. And again, as the Fulton County Sheriff had said would be the case, apparently the former president has been treated as other defendants are treated there, the same process. And let's bring in John Santucci, who has learned from at least one source, John, you believe a mugshot was in fact taken.
David, I have been in touch with Team Trump, and I'm told by at least one senior advisor to the former president that it is their understanding that a mugshot was taken of Donald Trump moments after he entered that Fulton County jailhouse, David. I'm also told, and we're showing on screen right now, the details from the jail, that to speed up the process, David, it's my understanding that some of the key details that most people are going through the process, the height, the weight, some of that was pre-reported by Donald Trump's aides to the jail. So it does not appear that anybody physically took the president's height or weight, that those details were provided on the president's behalf to speed up the process that he could get in and out as quickly as possible, David.
You talk about those details, and I don't share them now to be frivolous here. I share them because of the surreal nature of all this. As you look at this, some of the details, John, that you speak of describe the former president as having blonde or strawberry hair, a height of 6'3", weight 215 pounds. And John, you're now learning that part of that information was provided to try to speed up the process here.
Correct, David. I think the biggest thing that has been going on for the last several days is trying to find a way to get Donald Trump in and out. We know that the Fulton County District Attorney's Office was giving people windows that the jail would be a little calmer, not as busy. We know that some of the indications that Team Trump was given is that the evening would be better. Obviously, Donald Trump, always the TV producer at heart, looking for prime time to make a show of things. Donald Trump has often said, as you know, David, he believes every day of his life is a television program. But this one, David, has been weighing on Donald Trump. I mean, obviously, he has gone through this now 3 times, but going to a jailhouse is different. Getting a mugshot is different. And we know for Donald Trump, who always wants to be in control of the situation, that is where things have been different. And in this situation too, David, we know that Donald Trump, based on our understanding of the process here, was not surrounded by many aides at one point over the last few minutes. And that is something that has been very different for Donald Trump so far, David.
For our viewers watching here, John Santucci, thank you. For our viewers, stick with us here because we will wrap this up after we see images of the former president actually leaving that jail. But it is our understanding that he's been booked, processed, and is in the process of being released right now. As you heard John report there, the Trump team, the Trump legal team, had argued for ways to make this move a little more quickly. And one of the ways was to provide some of these personal details, you know, the color of his hair, his weight, his height, before he even arrived. And it wasn't just Trump's legal team and Donald Trump himself who wanted this to move more quickly. Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice correspondent, the Secret Service, law enforcement in this county and at the federal level wanted this to move quickly as well.
They absolutely did, David. And everyone in law enforcement knows that particular jail's history is colorful and none of it good. And the Secret Service wanted to get him in there as quickly as possible and out as quickly as possible. They're responsible, as you know, David, for the president's security. They know about the health conditions in there. They know the kind of inmates that are held there. They simply wanted the president to be booked, processed, and let go very quickly to get him out of there, David.
Pierre Thomas also watching along with us. Pierre, stay with us. Asha Rangappa, former Associate Dean, Yale Law School, former FBI agent. And Asha, you've been with us for much of our coverage along the way. What stands out to you as being quite different here in Fulton County from what we've seen before? This is now the 4th criminal indictment, the 4th time he has shown up to face charges this year.
Yes, David, this is a little bit like Groundhog Day, but today is different in a few ways. First, I think DA Fani Willis has really made an effort to treat him like any other defendant. In addition to this entire booking process, he's had to negotiate a bond agreement. She's making clear that no one is above the law in process as well as in substance in terms of charging him. The other thing that's different, I think, here is that this should really drive home to him that this is real. The Manhattan prosecution or charge against him, while significant, it was the first one, will likely not result in any jail time if he's actually convicted. The January 6th and Mar-a-Lago charges that have been brought by the special counsel, those are very serious. But if he wins the presidency, he has many levers of power where he can potentially quash or get out of those charges. This is one where he can't do that. And I think he really may be, when he's inside that jail, really looking around and saying, I don't have any way out of this legally, politically, unless I can really get acquitted on these charges. And that should worry him, in my opinion.
Asha, stay with us here for a follow-up as we look at live pictures, expecting former President Trump's motorcade any moment here to leave the Fulton County Jail. Asha, one of the questions on that debate stage last night for the other Republican candidates who, of course, want to beat him for the nomination, though all of them on that stage, nearly all of them, saying that they would support him even if he's convicted, if he's the nominee for the Republican Party in the race for the White House. But one of the questions was also about pardons. As you know, one of the candidates on the stage said, I will pardon Trump. What are the rest of you going to do? And we're looking at the former president's motorcade now leaving, heading back to the airport. But as you rightly point out, this is at the state level. Pardons are very different. It's not the governor. It's not the Republican governor in that state who would decide that. It's a parole board, and they don't even look into pardons until several years into any potential convict serving a sentence.
Yes, David, the pardon power by a future president is not an option for him, in addition to not being an option if he becomes president himself. That's a big thing for him to have to consider in this situation. He just doesn't have any way out in this kind of case, I don't think.
And one last quick question, and I want to bring this to Chris Timmons, because, Chris, we heard that the DA has set a date of when she would like this trial to begin. A lot of people say, legal observers who have been studying the case so far say that's unlikely. When do you believe we could actually see a trial start in Fulton County, Georgia?
It's going to have to happen on October 23rd, David. If they don't do that, Chesebro is going to be cut loose. He's acquitted by operation of law. So we're going to see at least one trial begin on that date unless Chesebro either withdraws his speedy trial demand or pleads guilty. But it looks like we're getting ready to go to trial October 23rd. The only question is whether Donald Trump will be sitting next to him when they're in that trial.
Wow, that's just extraordinary. We know the former president will try to fight that. Do you believe that we could actually see this play out before voters go to the polls?
I do. Although, I don't think we're going to have a verdict by then because I expect this to be a very long trial. I think jury selection is going to take a long time to get a jury that not only is impartial, but also has the time to be on a jury like this. They're paid very little, like $50 a day. And so there are very few people who can take 6 months, 9 months out of their lives to then go be on a jury, even in a case of this magnitude. So getting a jury is going to be difficult. And then after that, you've got 161 acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. They're all going to be proved. I'm pretty sure that the DA's office has all of their evidence. They're going to be ready to go on October 23rd. And so the only question is whether Chesebro is going to withdraw a speedy trial demand, whether he's going to plead guilty, whether he's ready to go, and who's going to be with him.
Chris, thank you so much as we watch these live pictures in Fulton County. And again, the country has watched a number of these now, these moments involving the former president showing up to face charges, though, as Asha pointed out a moment ago, they all are different from one another, but this one in particular is quite different. This is at the state level. Charges brought by the district attorney there in the Atlanta area, Fulton County, Fani Willis, involving the president and 18 alleged co-conspirators. President Trump, the former president, moments ago booked, released on 13 felony charges himself for this alleged conspiracy that he would have been in charge of. One of the things that we have reported out here is the fact that Obviously, his former personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City, also charged. He showed up. There's been a mugshot obviously out in the public domain this week from the Fulton County sheriff. He once tried people here in New York City, famously using a very similar statute that Fani Willis is using to go after not only Giuliani, but 18 other alleged co-conspirators and the former president. We're not expecting to see any mugshot anytime soon, though you saw it for yourself. The president's motorcade leaving, apparently giving a thumbs up through the window as he left, now headed back to the airport. He was hoping this would move quickly, and we have all witnessed here that is exactly the case, what has played out here in Fulton County, Georgia. The former president showing up one day before he had to. Our coverage will continue. ABC News Live, abcnews.com, of course, later tonight on Nightline, first thing in the morning on Good Morning America. And for many of you in the West, we'll have, obviously, up-to-the-minute late reporting at the top of World News tonight. I'll see you then. Good night.
This has been a special report from ABC News.